All right, let's dive right in. We all have those massive ambitions, right? Launching that business, getting healthier, or finally sitting down to write that book. But somehow, we constantly just get in our own way. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're really going to dig into why we procrastinate, the underlying psychology of taking action, and the specific frameworks you can actually use to finally translate your goals into reality.
So think about this. Why is it that we know exactly what we want, we have our goals laid out, but we still struggle so much to just focus? We constantly hold ourselves back, and the core reason for that usually stems from one single powerful emotion, and that's fear. Listen, we don't procrastinate because we're inherently lazy. No, we procrastinate because we are literally paralyzed by fear, and we end up spending all our energy just trying to manage that fear, instead of actually doing the work. Okay, moving on to Section 1, the illusion of fear. To really understand our roadblocks, we kind of have to break fear down into two completely distinct categories. Imagine a person living with an isolated tribe deep in the Brazilian Amazon. In that environment, they're facing primal fear on a daily basis. That's the immediate physical threat of, say, a wild animal, actual physical pain, or even death. But in our modern everyday lives, we aren't facing that. Instead, we're totally paralyzed by intellectual fears. Things like rejection, failure, judgment, even the fear of success. And the absolute most crucial distinction here, intellectual fears are entirely made up in our own minds.
Because these fears are intellectual, we're basically waking up every single morning and inventing a boogeyman. It's wild when you think about it. As humans, we have this incredible, yet sometimes terrible ability to project our minds into a future that doesn't even exist yet. Our brains project these super negative future scenarios, like a tiger attacking in the night, or our new business totally tanking. And because our mind and body are so incredibly linked, our brains send neuropeptides down to our bodies, flooding us with stress hormones as if that terrible event is happening right this very second. So we just sit there in our safe, comfortable living rooms, yet our hearts are racing like we are literally running for our lives.
So how do we rewire these limiting beliefs? Well, we follow a super specific three-step framework. First up is awareness. You absolutely must actively notice when you're slipping into that state of fear or negative judgment. Second, practice. You have to interrupt that thought. If you catch yourself imagining the absolute worst that could happen, force yourself to stop. Maybe close your eyes and ask, wait, what is the absolute best that could happen? And finally, repetition. You just do this over and over again and give yourself some grace while you do it. You see, you can't always change your first fleeting thought, but you can always control your second thought.
Which brings us to Section 2. You are not your thoughts.
To actually gain control over your internal narrative, you've got to learn how to calm your mind. Now, a lot of people think they need to somehow force their thoughts to just stop, but it's really not about making them go away. Picture yourself sitting peacefully on the edge of a mountain. Down below, there's a highway with a bunch of cars driving by. Those cars, those are your thoughts. Your goal isn't to run down there and stop the traffic. Your goal is simply to observe the cars going by without jumping into them. You don't have to get sucked into every single thought that crosses your mind.
And what that means is our identities are actually remarkably flexible. A really perfect example of this is the actor Jim Carrey. When he played the comedian Andy Kaufman in a movie, he went totally method and stayed in character for months. He played Andy Kaufman so deeply that when the movie finally wrapped, Carrey actually temporarily lost his own identity. He realized that if he could lose Jim Carrey so easily, well, then the identity of Jim Carrey was really just a character he had been playing his whole life. It completely proves that we are not permanently tied to who we think we are or to the thoughts we consistently have.
So I've got to ask, what is your most repeated thought? Studies actually suggest that about 90% of our thoughts are the exact same thoughts we had yesterday. Think about that for a second. Your failure or your success in life is heavily tied to your most repetitive thought. You must take a hard look at that thought and ask yourself, is this thought actually helping me move in the direction I want to go? Because if it's not, you have to consciously step in and choose a new second thought. Let's move right along to Section 3, the 7 levels of why.
Okay, so once we've finally cleared away those fake intellectual fears, we have to figure out what is actually going to fuel our action. We hear it all the time, people saying they need more motivation. But honestly, motivation is a total trap. Motivation is just a temporary, fleeting feeling. You might listen to an explainer like this one and feel amazing, but the moment you hit a real roadblock, poof, that motivation completely vanishes. What you actually want is to be driven. Drive is relentless. When you look into a truly driven person's eyes, you just know they aren't stopping. Why? Because their action is anchored to a profound, unshakable internal purpose.
To find that kind of relentless drive, you can use a brilliant technique called the 7 levels of why. You simply take your goal, whatever it is, and ask yourself why 7 times in a row. There's this incredible story from the source material about a coaching client who said he wanted to make $100,000. Now, on the surface, that's just a number, right? But by repeatedly asking him why, it completely stripped away those superficial layers. It turned out he actually wanted the money so he could afford a lawyer to regain custody of his kids and pull them out of a really dangerous neighborhood where he quite literally feared for their lives. By the end of it, that goal totally transformed from a shallow desire into this primal, unstoppable drive.
And I just love that because it brilliantly illustrates that old coaching adage. If your why is strong enough, your how will reveal itself. When you finally find your true emotional fuel, the roadblocks just aren't going to matter anymore. You won't care about the intellectual fears, and you definitely won't care about the judgment of other people. You will simply figure out the mechanics of how to succeed, because the alternative is completely unacceptable to you.
All right, section 4, the CEO of your life.
Having that powerful why requires a really radical paradigm shift about ownership. And look, it brings up a confronting, pretty heavy question. If your life fails, whose fault is it? Think about a business for a second. If a business explodes with success, the credit goes to the CEO who orchestrated the whole thing. But if that same business fails, the ultimate fault also falls completely on the CEO. So, if you get to the end of your life and you haven't created the happiness, the impact, or the abundance you dreamed of, whose fault is it? Ultimately, it's yours.
Becoming the CEO of your life means stepping up and taking absolute 100% ownership without ever playing the victim. Now hold on. It is incredibly vital that we make a distinction here. Past traumas, a really difficult childhood, or horrible things that might have happened to you in the past, those are absolutely not your fault. Not at all. But healing from them and directing your future from this day forward, that is entirely your responsibility. You just can't wait around for someone else to come and fix it.
And taking that level of radical responsibility requires making a true decision. The root word for decision is actually the Latin word decidere, which literally means to cut off all other options. It means committing so completely to your path, to your plan A, that you just entirely cut off plan B. Accepting the so-called safe route is actually a massive illusion. Choosing to live a safe life that you don't even love is far, far more dangerous than risking failure to get the life you truly want.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Finding Power in Silence. So we've talked a lot about drive, but we really have to balance all of this intense external ambition with internal peace. So many high achievers push themselves relentlessly because they secretly believe that reaching some financial destination or getting public recognition will finally make them feel safe or make them feel loved. But guys, that is the illusion of external achievement. You can hit a massive financial milestone and literally wake up the very next day realizing you feel the exact same inside. External success, money, all the cool stuff, none of it can heal an internal childhood wound. It just cannot fill an internal void.
You have to actually make space to process what's inside of you. Think about the metaphor of squeezing an orange. When you squeeze an orange juice comes out. Why? Simply because that is what's inside of it. As humans, when external pressure is applied, or conversely, when we finally just sit in silence and give ourselves some space, whatever emotions, traumas, or anxieties we have stored up inside us will naturally begin to bubble up and release.
And this is exactly why we must build a daily habit of silence. In the source material, it's compared to how a wild animal literally shakes off adrenaline after a really stressful event just to process the trauma. Taking just 5 minutes a day to sit in complete and total silence, no phone, no background noise, absolutely no distractions, allows your body to actually process those stored emotions. It builds this immense self-awareness, it reconnects you with your true authentic self, and ironically, by stopping all your frantic doing, it actually unlocks profound creativity.
So, I really want to leave you with a final provocative thought today. Take a good hard look at the goals you're chasing right now and ask yourself, what are you searching for out there in the world that you actually just need to give to yourself? Because perhaps the love, the acceptance, and the peace you are so frantically trying to earn from everyone else is exactly what you just need to grant yourself right now. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep leaning into the silence, find your true why, and go take some action.